Hey, hey, hey! Welcome to my cozy corner of the internet. This is Nephilim VA bringing you the 14th chapter of Inheritance, written by A is for Amy 71 on AO3. I wonder if All Might will repay Izuku for saving his ass in the last chapter. Before we can begin, let me inform you of the trigger warnings. This fanfiction is for mature audiences with canon-typical violence and a trigger warning for major character death. If that isn't your style, then I recommend Shades of Green, which is written by Maybe It's Friendly on AO3. It can be found on my channel! Canon Divergence is the name of the game and indulges the what-ifs of Midoriya Izuku having a quirk. With that being said, the chapter summary is as followed. Izuku has a decision to make. Now I implore you to sit back and relax whilst I read to you. Chapter 14. Izuku arrived to find not only All Might, but also Sir Night-Eye and Gran sitting around the low table in the sitting room on the top floor of Might Tower. He'd gone home to shower and change his clothes, and now he was wondering if he should have come straight here, since everyone wore very serious expressions. Somehow, All Might, in his deflated form, looked even more serious than he might have in his muscular one. Perhaps because he didn't always smile in this form. Is something wrong? Did something happen? He asked, frozen to the spot he had stopped in when he'd seen everyone gathered. No, there's nothing wrong, Sir told him. Come in and have a seat. All Might has something he needs to tell you about, and it's rather important that you listen carefully. Izuku let his bag slide to the ground beside the couch as he hopped up onto a cushion. He felt more like a little kid than usual, sitting with his feet dangling off the ground and the adults all looking at him. Midoriya-kun, All Might began. First, I want to tell you that what you did today was extraordinary. It was reckless, but you handled yourself well. Seeing you there running straight into danger while the other heroes hesitated to act was truly heroic. I, myself, was standing on the sidelines, hesitating, because I'd used up my time for the day, and was waiting for another hero to jump into action. You were the only one that did. You didn't think twice about trying to rescue a person you don't even like. You kept your wits about you, and used the tools you had on hand to do what you could to buy time. Izuku could feel himself blushing from the praise, and felt like he might burst with pride. We were watching from here, Gran said, gesturing to Sir as well. We were monitoring the area because there had been a report of a villain committing a theft, and then you showed up. You comported yourself well, Sir agreed. Though I can see we will have to work on some strategies for fighting that sort of villain in the future. Izuku nodded, eager to learn more of what he did right, and what he could have done differently or better. Now, All Might said, drawing the attention back around to why he'd asked Izuku to come. I have a story to tell you about my quirk, and how I became a hero. Izuku had wondered about this for some time, but when he asked Sir or Gran, they always said that All Might would tell him when he felt the time was right. No one knew exactly what All Might's quirk was, though it obviously had something to do with super strength. Izuku listened as All Might spoke about all for one and one for all, and how one for all had been passed down for generations. He explained how he had been quirkless but with a desire to be a hero, and how his master had given him one for all to cultivate. Now that All Might had been so gravely injured, it was time for him to choose a successor and begin the slow steps to retirement. After what I saw today, I'm both hesitant to retire, when the current heroes aren't living up to their potential, and eager to get my successor up to speed as quickly as possible, so there won't be too long of a gap without someone who can use one for all to become the new symbol people need to feel safe. Once you step down, they'll all have to step up. They've gotten lazy because you're around to pick up their slack. Endeavor's a creep, but at least he's trying to keep up with you. The rest need a reality check," Gran said bluntly. "The kid won't be ready for another 6 years or more. Still, needs to make it through middle school and UA." "Wait," Izuku said, trying to follow the thread of what Gran was saying. What kid?" "Gran," Sir scolded him lightly. "Let Toshinori handle it." All Might sighed. "Izuku, I want you to be my successor." Izuku just sat there blankly staring, as if he was waiting for the punchline. "Izuku, did you hear what he said?" Sir asked, when the silence had gone on for an awkwardly long time. "You don't have to," All Might rushed to assure him. "If you don't want to—" "Of course I want to!" Izuku said immediately. "I'm just kind of... me. Just because I jumped on a villain today?" Sir snorted out a laugh that he tried to pass off as a cough while Gran cracked a smile. "That's not the only reason, no," All Might told him, sounding amused. "But it was the final proof I needed that you have what it takes to be a great hero. I actually did put a lot of thought into it. We put a lot of thought and consideration into it. One of the things that first made us consider you was your ability to handle multiple quirks without putting a strain on your body. One for All is a powerful quirk that gets more powerful with each passing. It's a stockpiling quirk. And even though I was quirkless when I received it, I've still done my part to cultivate it, and all of that power would get passed on to you. It's a lot to handle." "You can take your time and think about it, kid. You probably got about 1,000,000 questions to ask. You usually do." "I don't need time to think about it, but I know I'll have a ton of questions," he said with a nod. "The only thing I've ever wanted to do is be a hero, but none of my quirks are really that great for hero work." "That's just not true," All Might told him. "You have incredible quirks, and while it would be an uphill battle, you could absolutely become a hero with what you already possess." "Izuku," Sir said seriously, "I don't think you should give him your answer for at least a few days. Let it really sink in. I don't think you realize what keeping a secret this huge entails, and how isolated it can make you feel. Think about it. Write down your questions. You need to be absolutely sure about this." "I guess maybe I should talk this over with my dad," Izuku said sheepishly, seeing the wisdom in Sir's words. "That's just another thing to think about," Gran said. "Anyone who knows about the secret about All Might's quirk is a possible target. There's a reason his circle of close friends is so small." All Might himself just sat there with his fingers threaded together, looking at Izuku intently. "Even if you turn down this offer," he finally said, "we won't abandon you. You're already a target of All for One's remaining followers, and you need training to be prepared for any possible interaction with them in the future." Izuku nodded slowly, still thinking about what it might mean to tell his father about all of this. How much danger would it put him in? More than he was already? Somehow he doubted it. They had already used his father's need of a housekeeper to infiltrate their lives. They already knew where to find him, and Izuku doubted his father could just switch jobs. "Is it okay for me to tell my dad about all this?" Izuku asked. "It might be better if we explained it to him," Sir said. "I'm sure he'll have questions that you won't be able to answer." "What if he says, I can't do it?" Izuku worried aloud. There was a pause before All Might cleared his throat and said, "We'll just have to hope we can convince him." "Ideally, we would have waited until you were out of UA before even suggesting that you take over One for All," Sir said matter-of-factly, but the confrontation with All for One and All Might's present condition unfortunately pushes that timeline forward considerably. "You were thinking about this before then?" Izuku asked with wonder. In a more abstract way, yes, All Might said. I'm not exactly a young man anymore, you know. I would have had to retire in another 10 years or so anyway. We were looking a bit further into the future, and would probably have explored multiple different possibilities. You were kind of dropped into our laps like a sign from the gods. We wouldn't even have to think of an excuse for you to suddenly have another quirk. Izuku's eyes widened at that. Wow. He began to mutter to himself, pinching his lower lip as his mind whirled with all the new information. He missed it as Gran looked at the other two men and sighed. He's doing it again. Leave him be, Sir said quietly. He's processing. It's kinda cute, All Might said with a shrug. Izuku put together timelines in his head and events that had happened, combined with the training they'd given him and the events of the day. By the time he wound down, he'd noticed that all three men were looking at him with varied expressions of amusement. That evening, Izuku sat next to his father, who was still reeling from the news about his son fighting a villain and saving his classmate. Izuku had kind of forgotten to call him afterward, and his father had been in meetings all day and not heard the news. Sir and All Might had explained all of that first, praising Izuku's quick thinking and bravery. It had even been on the news, so they got to watch the footage together. It was kind of surreal. Izuku's dad looked stunned, worried, and proud, in that order. Then he got back around to worry again. There's more, isn't there? He asked. You didn't just come here to tell me about this. That's true, All Might said cautiously. We have a bit of a story to tell you. Hisashi listened to All Might's story about One for All, with realization dawning on him as to why they were sharing this with him. The fact that All for One was that old and that insidious within the crime world made him furrow his brow and clench his jaw. He didn't seem to notice when tendrils of smoke started to drift up from his nostrils as they explained about the true damage that All Might had taken during his battle with All for One. A plume of smoke floated out of his mouth when he saw All Might's true, deflated, emaciated form where the huge iconic figure had been sitting. Izuku sighed when his father pinched his bottom lip and began to mutter, just as his son had done earlier, as he processed everything. When he finally worked it out in his mind, he sighed, smoke still trailing from his nose and mouth. Dad, don't set off the fire detectors, Izuku said calmly as his father seemed to come out of his trance. Sorry, he said, taking a deep breath to suck in as much of the smoke as he could and consciously tamping down his quirk with effort. He looked at the two men who were regarding him with serious, cautious expressions. You want to pass this power on to Izuku. It wasn't a question. Yes. He's a child. Yes, but he won't be for long, Sir pointed out. And villains won't take his age into consideration, All Might pointed out. Won't this make him a target? His father asked. Izuku wasn't sure if it was too early to say, but it seemed like a good sign that his father hadn't just immediately said no. I'm already a target, Dad, Izuku said quietly. All for One was beaten, but had a lot of followers, especially that Tomura guy. And he's scary and has a really strong quirk. Zoo, agreeing to be the next All Might. It's on a completely different level, his dad pointed out. True, but I was going to apply to UA anyway, Izuku said in his most persuasive voice. So if I'm going to be a hero anyway, don't you want me to be the strongest one I can be? More smoke began to drift up from his dad's nostrils, and Izuku bit his lip in worry. I need to think about this and make sure we are taking everything into account before a decision is made, Both men looked relieved to hear this. "Of course," All Might said firmly. "That's why we're asking." Izuku and his dad thanked the men for coming and saw them to the door. Once they were gone, Izuku went to a small cabinet and took out a bottle of whiskey. He took it to the kitchen and put some ice in the glass before pouring a generous splash of the amber liquid over it before taking it back to his father. His dad was still standing in the front door, staring into nothingness, lost in thought. He jolted when he felt Izuku's hand on his arm, and laughed a bit when he saw the glass in his son's hand. "You read my mind," he said, taking the glass. Izuku just gave a small grin and thanked his most useless quirk for telling him what his dad wanted at the moment. They went back to the living room and talked late into the night, both of them making a list of questions, concerns, and, in his father's case, requirements that they would need satisfied before a final decision was made. It wasn't the hard yes that Izuku was hoping for, but it was a conditional one. His dad had promised to be in contact with All Might and Sir Nightai to get some questions and reassurances before anything else was settled. In the end, Izuku was allowed to accept, with the promise from All Might that he would do everything in his power to guide and protect Izuku until he was ready to stand on his own as a hero. Both All Might and Sir Nightai promised to be proper mentors, with Gran as an unofficial side benefit, lending a hand when and where he could. Izuku's heart was racing wildly as he stood beside his father in Might Tower and accepted a hair from All Might's head. "Eat this," All Might said. Izuku and his father wore identical expressions of skepticism. "Izuku has to consume some of All Might's DNA for the transfer to happen," Sir clarified.
"Ah. Okay,"
Izuku said, still somewhat reluctant. "Can he have something to wash it down with?" his dad asked. Gran had a glass of milk and a taiyaki on a plate waiting. "I got you covered," the old man said cheerfully. "Toshinori didn't have such a luxury when he received One for All, and spent the rest of the day gagging on that damn hair. Think he got it wrapped round his uvula." He seemed to think this was hilarious, but Izuku wasn't so easily distracted. After a moment, Izuku wound the hair around his finger until it was in a small ring, and shoved it in his mouth. Before he even tried to swallow it, he grabbed the taiyaki and took a huge bite, practically swallowing it whole, then washed it down with the entire glass of milk.
"I think it went down,"
Izuku said once the glass was empty. "Good job, my boy," All Might said in the booming voice of his muscular form. "You are now the 9th holder of One for All." He patted Izuku on the back with enough force to knock him forward a step before laughing happily and suddenly deflating.
"I don't feel any,"
Izuku began, but then felt a shiver travel up from the tips of his toes to the top of his head. Faint crackles of verdant electricity spider-webbed around him for a few moments, and the veins under his skin glowed pink, as if lit from within, then settled down and disappeared.
"That was weird,"
Izuku exclaimed, looking down at his hands that had just been glowing. "I'm pretty sure it worked." He looked at his dad, who looked shaken and had a tendril of smoke escaping from his open mouth. Once his Ashi calmed down and after Izuku received One for All, of course he was excited to try it out. They went into All Might's private gym and Izuku took the stance Gran had taught him. He listened to the advice from All Might gave about him picturing the power surging in his mind. Gran helped lace up the boxing gloves that Izuku wore when he practiced. Sir was keeping a careful eye on All Might, and Izuku wondered if he was worried about what would happen to him now that One for All had been passed along. All Might had already explained that the embers of the power were still glowing inside of him, and that it would take quite a while for them to be extinguished. Still, he'd never done it before. What if he was wrong? All Might sensed both Sir and Izuku looking at him and smiled. I'm fine. In fact, better than I expected. The slight pull I was always feeling near young Midoriya has gone away. Maybe because I'm technically quirkless again. That answer seemed to appease Sir, so Izuku nodded and went back to concentrating on trying to use One for All. He envisioned the power surging through him, and the reddish-pink glow under his skin and green sparks appeared again in a web around his body as he drew back his fist and punched the heavy bag as hard as he could. There was a thunderous crash as the bag rattled on its chains and swayed wildly. Izuku gasped and hopped backwards, amazed by the strength of the blow. He'd never so much as made the bag creak before, much less move it like he just had. His dad was staring open-mouthed again, and waiting for the bag to settle before he leaned on it, pushing with both hands in an attempt to move it. He failed. His hand was shaking as he pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and patted at his forehead. "Are you okay, Dad?" Izuku asked in concern. The glow that seemed to appear when the power of One for All was in use had faded away once more. "I think that's more than enough proof," his dad whispered on a puff of smoke. "I agree," Sir said with satisfaction. "Now the real training can begin," All Might said, rubbing his hands together. Izuku grinned. Thank you so much for watching this video. I appreciate all the support you've given me. I love the fact that the timeline of my hero has been moved forward almost, but it is so effective and well written. It's just mwah, magnifique. Also, thank you so much for 600 subscribers. I have no idea how we did this. I appreciate every single one of you, and I love you all, but I think you all know that now because of how many times I said that I love you. All credits go to the original creator of this fanfiction. A is for Amy71 on AO3. I would highly appreciate it if you gave this video a like and you subscribe to the channel and you hit the notification bell to be notified of when I next upload. There is no pressure to do so though. Thank you for visiting my cozy corner of the internet. Keep growing my sunflowers. Mwah!